Hi, I'm Paul Verschoor, and today I'm speaking with Professor Dr. Sten Grillner of the Karolinska Institute. We're looking at the complexities of fostering collaboration in science. As one of the foremost experts on the physiological basis of behavior, Professor Grillner chaired the Nobel Prize Committee for Physiology or Medicine for 20 years and is currently the Secretary General of the International Brain Research Organization. So Stan, before we really dive into the issue of collaboration, could you give us a short summary of the trajectory that brought you to where you are today in your science and in your activities?
Yeah. So I started off by being interested in the intrinsic function of the networks that coordinate locomotion, and which was mostly spinal affair, and interested in the intrinsic function of how these networks operate, which meant that you had to identify the neurons, the properties of the neurons, the synaptic properties and the network. And in doing so, also simulation was a very important aspect, which it has been for the last little bit more than 30 years. Mm-hmm. Together with detailed biology, detailed analysis. So it has been very much a bottom-up approach to the networks. With the so we then from working on mammals, we then decided it was really too difficult, too complex. You could not get the information, and then we made a rapid change over to the simplest vertebrate group available, the lamprey. The lamprey had several advantages in that you could have the spinal cord, which is a natural slice. You could have that in vitro. You could induce activity in the networks, etc. And when we had solved that, which took some time, we then proceeded to look at brainstem mechanism underlying spatial orientation, and in particular the tectum, etc. And at some point, we felt that we had analyzed the different networks that coordinate movement sufficiently well. So we need to understand the forebrain mechanism that determine when a given pattern of behavior or given network is called into action. And in doing so, we analyzed the basal ganglia as one central bone. We had thought wrongly that the basal ganglia of of the lamprey, which actually diverged from 60 million years ago from the lineage leading to the mammals, that it would be a very simplified circuit. And but we were wrong with it, and it turned out the basal ganglia in great detail and the similar properties as in mammals, the same type of neurons, the same type of connectivity, the same type of transmitters, the same type of organization. So it then turned out that the basal ganglia had essentially evolved very early in vertebrate evolution, some 500 million years ago. And the basic circuit was there already then. And what has happened then is that you have presumably modules that control different patterns of behavior, that can release different patterns of behavior. And what has happened during evolution is that you have kept the structure there, but you have instead multiplied the number of modules to control different patterns of behavior. So essentially, with the development of the complex meta behavior from lamprey to man, have gradually multiplied the units to control more and more
Right.
patterns.
But you've done, but Sten, all that work you've done as you were at Karolinska Institute, right? Over all these decades.
Yeah.
And so it's like,
I started in Gothenburg, and but I mean, since 1975, I've been at the
right, exactly. And we met in the 90s in the context of the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development Global Science Forum, discussing international collaboration and cooperation. Excuse me. But then also, of course, being a faculty member at Karolinska, you also were involved or got involved in the panels that would discuss who would earn the Nobel Prize. So when did that happen? In what period were you on those panels?
I started to be on the panel in 1986, and then I was a member of the Nobel Committee for about 14 years. I was also, of course, a member of the Nobel Assembly, that is a larger entity with 50 professors from the Karolinska Institute. But the Nobel Committee is essentially a smaller altogether. It's a small committee, which is 6, and then it's a little bit enlarged, which is about 15.
Right.
So I had the privilege of taking part.
But now, would you see that as a collaborative process? Is it a form of collaboration?
I would say that the process of selecting is very much a process of collaboration.
So what makes it so? What makes that a collaborative process?
Let me just say that the Nobel Prize started in 1901, and actually that was after the death of Nobel and his donation. Actually, the Academy of Science wasn't particularly interested. The Karolinska Institute was not particularly interested. And the king at the time thought it was a very bad idea to have an international prize. So it took several years before the Academy of Science and the Karolinska Institute agreed to do this. Mm-hmm. But then what it turned out that when they started, they had designed a very interesting structure that is still used today. So it was very insightful when that you are inviting then universities around the world, academies around the world to nominate candidates. But then each time when the nominations come in the end of January, then you have a meeting and you go over all the different nominations. Of course, many of them have been nominated earlier. But the first time you have a little written account, whether it's interesting or perhaps not so interesting. We have lots of nominations that are more friends or deans, etc. But those that are interesting go further to making a little bit deeper analysis, sort of like 2-3 pages. And by 1 or 2 experts usually within the committee, that either concludes that, well, this looks interesting, and if it passes that barrier, then you ask you ask one or several people to make an in-depth analysis. And that's a thing that takes 3-4 weeks to write, because you really need to read up on what has been done, what has been dominated. And one thing that is important in the Nobel Prize is also that it's a discovery. It is not a lifetime achievement. So it's a distinct discovery. Sometimes it's set up very, very closely. And that, I think, has been very important. But then, so then after several years, if you still have different specialists that come along, everybody agrees that this seems to be a possibility that has the appropriate scientific height or value. And then it starts to be a possible candidate. But and strange enough, as I said before, this way of dealing with the prize or dealing with the process of selecting was conceived of at the very beginning, and I think it's no other prize that has that structure, that has a written account and a history.
Right.
So I mean, you can go back when you discuss something. But remember, X said that 10 years ago. It couldn't be right, or must be right, or something like that too. So it's. But I think the discussion in general within the committee, which is a more important structure, is usually very collegial. Of course, different people have a little bit different interests and inclinations, but I mean, in general, people are very enthused over being able to select something that is a very good prize.
But Stan, what you're describing is a procedure, right?
Yeah.
And this procedure actually sets up two forms of collaboration, if you want, right? Because now you have a collaboration at the time itself with the panel, but then you have a collaboration over time with what that panel and its members might have deliberated previously.
Yeah.
Right. So do you see different aspects to these forms of collaboration?
I think what has led to that the Nobel Prize has survived with comparatively few mistakes is this history that you can go back. It is not the meeting that you're sitting at. You go back and you have different comments that come in. So gradually you have an acceptance that this is good, or perhaps not so good. And I mean, what is very important is that when you select a prize, you have the right combination of people, and it's a worthy prize.
So this is an interesting point you raise, right? Because it means people, the members of the panel, and in the end of the outside world, feel also, if you want, a weight on their shoulders of making the proper decision.
Very much. People are loyal to the idea to create, to really select the worthy recipient.
Yeah, but so how would you define that sense of responsibility? Is that a responsibility to whom? It's a responsibility to the prize as some abstract notion. Or is it a responsibility towards scientific standards? What's that common objective that is exerting this moral pressure?
No, I think it's a respect for science and also acceptance of the idea that you should be able to select very good science that is sort of highlighted to the public and also with a reward to the recipient. So I think it's a scientific idea and is the determinant. I mean, it of course varies. People are different.
But now I could also argue that, like you said, right, in its origins, there was actually not much appreciation for the whole idea. So that meant that also those that were proposing to actually put in place this procedure had to convince a critical environment. So I could also argue why people are so worried about doing it properly is that they want to avoid any serious criticism from the outside world. Is that playing a role?
I'm not sure. I mean, one must realize that this was the first major scientific prize. It was a new conception. I mean, of a prize, not the best Swede, the best Nordic. It was international. That was a foreign idea at the time. I think that, I mean, in the beginning, I don't know how important it was considered. Of course, it was important, but gradually, I think it has taken on an important aspect of promoting the best science, and it's often basic science, not only, of course, but it is also highlighting that you have very basic discoveries that often has led to very new insights.
Right. But now that we can look.
So the unexpected usefulness.
Yes. But now look, it would also be good to look at the failures of the procedure, right? Because it has worked, let's say, 99% of the time. But there also have been dramatic failures also recently in the panel dealing with literature. And I don't want to necessarily go into that, the discussion of why that would be exactly and the personalities involved, but more apparently then the procedure that we just discussed, and also this sort of shaping of the process through a sense of responsibility was not enough, right? So apparently there was a bug in the procedure that got exploited. So what was?
I'm not acting. I mean, it was a very severe bug in the interaction within the Swedish Academy, and there was a lot of personal problems, and which I have no real insight in. But I mean, it didn't look good. But I don't think actually the process of selecting the laureates was severely criticized. So,
well, but actually, 1 year that was skipped for the Nobel Prize.
I mean, it was skipped. It was skipped because the Academy got into civil war. So, and a lot of people left. The secretary left. I mean, it was almost that it would collapse, but then it was refurnished by adding new members, and then it's probably on the track again. But in the I think the selection, the literature, of course, it's very difficult to
sure.
I mean, what is? It's so much simpler with science.
Yeah, but what I try to get to here is why the failure, right? So because this might tell us something about how collaboration works.
Yeah, but I mean, essentially, the Swedish Academy failed because personal interaction, and it was not primarily a question. I mean, they do a lot of other things, and so I don't think I mean, they had to cancel the prize for 1 year, and that was, I mean, it was really terrible.
But is there anything you could imagine you could change in the way the protocol is defined of collaboration to converge on the decision that could avoid such a catastrophic failure in the future?
I mean, I don't know. I could. I mean, the Swedish Academy is a special case. The committees that run on the Academy of Science, Physics and Chemistry, and Medicine, I think, has been little problems. It's and I mean, the thing is also that whereas the members of the Nobel Committee for these 3 different prizes, it is rotating. The members of the Swedish Academy has been lifetime appointment, and it was thought that you cannot resign. You were not allowed to resign. As a consequence of the turmoil, you are now allowed to leave the Academy.
Okay.
And there's only 18, and it was, I guess, a couple of them that never came, and so forth. So the Swedish Academy really have difficulties in having an opinion of more than that. It was an organization that it was surprising that it worked so well for so many years.
Yes. But now you also have been very much involved in, let's say, more the international, almost diplomacy around science and scientific initiatives. I mentioned the Global Science Forum of the OECD, but you also have been involved in IBRO and other organizations. So are the patterns you see in this international collaboration in the science community, do you see commonalities with how you look at collaboration within this Nobel Prize election process? Or do you see them as very separate processes?
I mean, I would say that the Nobel Prize award process is something rather different. But I mean, I would say that if you are in the board of FENS, or if you are in the board of IBRO, it's if you have, I mean, the thing is that you have rather much rotation, and you have people coming in and out with different background, but nevertheless, most of the time, you can have a board that works rather nicely together. I mean, you have a few things that you do, and then you like to take up new things. And sometimes you have bad fights, but more often people work together. But I mean, in the international organization where you have people appointed from very different parts of the world, etc., it's sometimes different.
But now there's in some sense also possible contradiction here between the two processes of collaboration, right? Because as you said earlier, in the Nobel Prize, it's really about the specific discovery.
Mm.
And that's not something that a huge community in the end will put their name to, at least certainly not in the life sciences. While on the other hand, if you look at these international organizations, it's all about building large communities, building large shared infrastructure. But in some sense, with the Nobel Prize, you're not rewarding people for that effort. It's really about the individual making that one discovery before anyone else does. So is that telling us something very deep about scientific collaboration, or is that just an accident?
Yeah, it's. I think the importance or the individual Nobel Prizes are not so much the individuals that are rewarded as it is put the torchlight on a given discovery and a given development and its possible benefit for mankind, or why it is interesting. So I've argued it has been plans to develop a Nobel museum, whether there exists one, but I have been argued there that it should not be that you should see the different prizes in life sciences, for instance, year after year, as sort of an illustration of how science has evolved. So, different sort of point to different areas that have been of primary importance. Sometimes prices get old very fast, and others remain there. So I think the importance is not the individual. It is that you put the torchlight on an important part of science that then media, etc., take over.
But even though your emphasis is on the habit system and the dorsolateral striatum, value and incentives do shape behavior. And so in some sense, a Nobel Prize and prizes like the Nobel Prize and others do emphasize very much the individual, while in parallel, actually, we spend a lot of time talking about building large communities and infrastructure. But is that maybe more expressing a dream about how science could be? Also, putting it at an industrial scale, well, actually, the actual practice is it's just a small group of people, if an individual who really pushes a certain issue to the limit for years.
Let me take an example. The Human Genome Project. It was very important, but it was not a major discovery. You didn't understand anything from that. Mm-hmm. But it was a platform to take off, which has benefited a number of researchers, and of course with it, and I think you can apply the same sort of reasoning around infrastructure for neuroscience. I mean, the Adam brain is the same sort of thing, or you can also take the development of simulation tools and neuroinformatics and so forth. So I think it's two types of development. One, very important, is that you put platforms, and then you have all the individual researchers that pick what is interesting and see funny relations that have not been possible to reveal without this.
Yeah, but actually the Human Genome Project is a good example, right? Because the result was in the end not because of a large community working together, but actually an individual having the insight that doing it with automated screening would speed up the whole process tremendously.
No, absolutely. But it's an infrastructure development, and when you had reached it, was suddenly possible to ask questions you couldn't ask before.
Yeah, but isn't there the risk then that we put the cart in front of the horse? Because maybe who says we need that specific infrastructure to get the Nobel Prize that we all strive towards?
I'm not talking about Nobel Prizes in this context.
No. You see what I'm saying, right? Because maybe the infrastructure an individual researcher needs is at a much smaller scale, right? To lead to breakthroughs in the field, certainly in the life sciences, right?
Yeah, no, but let me rephrase. The fact that you have the Human Genome Project, and you have all the other genomes, has allowed all the small guys to ask a lot of interesting questions, which they couldn't have asked without.
Okay, that's fair enough. So it's like an enabler. But still,
it it's an enabler. And I mean, to develop infrastructure is very important, but it doesn't, I mean, you can even ask sometimes if it's science or not. And that is predictive. You do exactly that. You cut here. You do. So it's in a sense very low level science, but to the benefit of all the different researchers that like to ask questions.
But then the infrastructure, in some sense, becomes a backbone for collaboration, even if the individual users don't directly collaborate.
Yeah. So
is that the reality of the science as you see it?
Yeah, I mean, you have. I mean, essentially, of course, if you suddenly pose a question, you think that's very interesting, and then you realize that in order to pursue this, you need also to look at that and look at that, which people that you may not know have dealt with. Then it's conducive to create collaboration. But I mean, it's motivated of the project.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, and in science, I think it's always very important that you have a specific question or a set of questions that you can put up in.
Sure. But then for the individual scientists or also the young scientists who are growing into their careers, do you see it as a collaborative process or a more competitive process that is predicated on a shared infrastructure?
I think for training people, I think it's very important that they have rather much freedom so they can make mistakes and also make discoveries. Of course, within the framework that you think is interesting and that they're funded for. So I think. I mean, sometimes you hear about labs that put two postdocs on the same project and make them compete, and that's not exactly what I prefer.
Right, but does it work? No, because the thing is, so after the Second World War, there was this famous report by Vannevar Bush on science, the endless frontier, where the decisive argument was made, look, science also won the war. And it's by virtue of these large-scale collaborative projects that gave us the superfortress and the atomic bomb that we can guarantee prosperity for our society. And then that industrial-scale science, grounded much more in physics and engineering, became a bit like a standard. So then raises now the question, is that the model we should strive towards in this domain of life science, and in particular in neuroscience? Is it this large-scale, industrial-scale collaboration that, as in to discover the Higgs boson, you have teams of 1,000+ physicists working together and analyze the data? Is that the future for this domain? Or is it more individuals and small teams that maybe share tools, but that as individuals and small teams will actually make the breakthroughs that this field needs? So is it going to diverge from this Vannevar Bush model of collaboration, large scale industrial, or is it converging? So what's your view there? Where are we going?
I mean, I think to have large scale efforts is clearly sometimes very useful, like you had the Human Genome Project. But the novelty and the unique contributions is very often small scale. It's individual brains, a couple of individual brains that interact. But I mean, they need, of course, infrastructure. They need the money. They need all this, and so it's not either or.
Okay. So then, do you believe that humans, if we take neuroscience as our use case, will be able to really fully realize the potential of collaboration? Or will they always be just approximating it and then stumble at the last moment, as for instance in the case of the Nobel Prize for Literature? Or you think it's possible? Do you see it as a real possibility to realize this?
I mean, it's always statistics. It sometimes it's successful.
I want your prediction, not your statistics.
No. I think it's essentially collaborations will work well in a certain proportion of the cases. In other cases, due to personal things, I mean, it may never work. You irritate yourself immensely on some little detail and it's gone.
So, but if you could change one thing in the average neuroscientist, let's say, what would it be? What's the thing you would change so that they can more effectively collaborate and get to target understanding the human brain?
Not to jump on the bandwagon each time.
Mm-hmm. But jumping on a bandwagon is also a form of collaboration.
Yeah, rather expensive type.
But it might be the way to get your resources, right? Because this is where the field is interested in.
Yeah, no, it may be a way to get resources, but I mean, if the aim is to reveal and understand new important aspects,
mm-hmm.
sometimes you have to look away. And
yeah, that's a good point. Especially coming from you, right? Having been on, let's say, a vertebrate animal model that was not necessarily an F1 center of attention, right? The lamprey, which in the end really led to a lot of breakthroughs in this domain of understanding motor control and behavior. So, if you look back upon last question, look back upon our experience in the so-called Global Science Forum. Do you think it is wise to speak of things like a global science forum in this context? Because maybe what you need is also the variability of different approaches without trying to coordinate too much, and in that sense also create risks of building bandwagons.
I mean, the Global Science Forum, its strengths was probably that you have representatives for the different governments that could discuss about science and agree about certain types of collaborations. And if you remember, when we were both part of the process that set up the new International Informatics Coordinating Facility, INCF. It was a very laborious process.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of disagreement. But then finally we had a proposal there, and that was written. And then the Global Science Forum played a role in that it accepted the proposal after having to redo it several times. But then the process was that the different ministers of research in the different OECD countries all recommended their governments that it was a way to go.
Mm-hmm. Which didn't happen the first time around.
No, it didn't.
So that was interesting, right? That this only happened once the request really became very concrete in terms of a building and infrastructure, as opposed to something more abstract, which was collaborative, actually. Right? So collaborative network was considered too abstract to gain political traction. Mm-hmm. It had to be concretized into indeed concrete.
It was a business plan had to be written, actually.
Mm-hmm.
It was called business plan.
Yes. But if you look back upon that process, which took more than 10 years, do you think it could have been done more efficiently?
Absolutely.
Okay. What was the biggest fly in the ointment there, you think?
Well, I mean, it was that different stakeholders had very different interests, and some of them had very difficult to listen and remember, if you remember.
Right. Which actually brings you back to your Nobel Prize procedure of remembering, right, of what was discussed.
Yeah.
All right, Sten Grillner, thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sten, you're off the hook now.
Very good.
Thank you very much. I think this was interesting and cool. There were a lot of things that I would have liked to pursue, but I understood, given your time constraints, I sort of cut some corners here and there. But actually, to me, this is an important issue for how we think about neuroscience. Where we are still at the beginning, right? We're not even close to understanding how the brain works, and there is a little bit of sort of a naive physics-oriented intuition, like, oh, if we make it big, then the magic will happen, as we saw in the Human Brain Project. And for some strange reason in neuroscience, we just don't manage. And maybe it tells us something very fundamental in the end about...
What was interesting was the US Brain Initiative, because, after when Brain Project was presented, it just took a few weeks before the Human Brain Initiative was conceived. And with lots of money, which was very good, of course. But then you had this committee, about 10 people, that sort of designed the program. But it was and several of our colleagues, and what happened then was that you had they represented different areas, and they were to decide if they could focus on something. And I think I would have. My proposition there would be that you should have focused on one problem, and then would have people sort of working on different levels on that. So they would work independently, and then once a year you should have them in a symposium, and they were telling about what they were doing, what they had accomplished, etc.
Yeah.
But of course, for all the members of the committee, that was meant that their areas, for most of them, it was meant that their areas would be outside. So they couldn't agree on that.
Exactly. So actually, the field of nanotechnology was a big player there as well, right?
Yeah.
And I once asked this lady, Corey Brackman, who was then the spokesperson for the American Brain Project. Yeah, and I asked her, but isn't that a risk for your project? Because now you go to the lowest common denominator between all these different fields, which means in the end, you won't do anything. And she got all agitated. And she said, but the president of the United States asked us to do this. That was her only answer.
Corey Bargman is usually quite good.
Yeah.
I like her a lot, but she is overstating her research on the worm cellulitis.
Yeah, but I don't think she cares anymore, because now she leads this Zuckerberg Center, right? So
halftime.
Oh, halftime. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So she is flying back and forth. No, but she's rather good. She's quite.
To me, it was an illustration. There were no good.
But I think it was an illustration that they could not decide.
Exactly. That's what I meant.
So they said that the first, and I actually talked with her about that also. and and she said that, well, the first 5 years we will set up all these new techniques that will help us solve the brain, and during the next 5 years we will do that.
Exactly. Yeah, I remember that. And then I asked Terry, and then Terry said, well, if we just train a few postdocs across these disciplines, that would be great. So, but it's interesting, but in both cases, it has not been devastating success, right? And this is something that we should think about that, because what does it mean for shaping progress in understanding mind and brain? Because apparently we haven't understood that process. As much as in the Nobel Prize, there's a clear procedure and it works. But we haven't found it yet for understanding mind and brain.
I mean, actually, I wrote, I think it was in Neuron, and this was just when it started, the brain project, or the brain initiatives. I wrote something about the brain initiatives where I actually argued, as I argued now, that you should have a focus there.
Look, and actually we made the same point in the Global Science Forum to say, no, we need use cases to focus. Otherwise, the alternative is what we have seen now. But so I fully agree with that, but okay. They didn't listen, Stan, I'm sorry.
I know. But soon they will become much worse. Okay.
Let's hope so.
Yeah, I really don't expect that. But
hi, you listened to one of our podcasts in the series on collaboration, produced by the Ernst Forum and the Convergent Science Network. You can find more episodes on our website.